What's going on, everybody? Emmett Ferguson here, and this is a book that Bill Gates recommended to me through his blog. It's one of his on his reading list. It's called Deng Xiaoping and the Transformation of China. Now, if you ever want to find a good book and you want to learn from some of the best people in the world, learn from the greatest. You got to find some reading lists of the greatest, like Bill Gates. And when I was reading through his list, I was like, I was born in China, and it would be great to know about the complete transformation of it, like what happened before all of that. So, me aside, Deng Xiaoping and the Transformation of China was recommended by Bill Gates through his blog, and does an amazing job of documenting China from the I think it was the 1940s is like the first era, 1900s, from the 1904 up until the 1990s when Deng Xiaoping was took leadership after Mao Zedong died. And this book does an incredible job of documenting the 70s, the 80s, and it's a great book for anybody who either wants to read a great biography, which also documents the biography of an entire country, or just, maybe your entire business, you're leading an organization that's related to China, or you're leading an organization that's related to a development in China, or you have you just want to learn more about the culture and where it's been. And although, the book goes from the 1900s up until the 1990s, and I think even like early 2000 maybe. I don't have a date here, but yeah, up until the 90s. So up until the 90s, this is a great bit of text to go, because not only are you getting the biographical history of the country, of the business, economic, business, financial, political leaders, but you also get an idea of where the country's been and why it might be the way it is today. And I think this is a great book for business leaders. It's just for people that have to deal with many different countries to have an idea of one of today's mega superpowers. You got United States, the UK, you got China, Russia, and all of those, India. And with all of those countries, they've all got their own backgrounds for centuries. And there's a reason why the countries are the way they are today, and it's because of the leaders. And if anything, if you're just into business, because this book isn't really about politics. I would, because it does go over like all the challenges that happened from Mao Zedong, and how he completely all the controversial things that he did. Some consider it very good, some other people consider it very not so good. And to take leadership after a guy like Mao Zedong requires a very specific type of leadership. And what you'll also learn is that Deng Xiaoping was actually even, I think he was imprisoned. I don't know the exact terms for it, but he was a leader who was imprisoned by a man, and he still came out to respect him and want to help to lead the country. When you think about it, here's the mind-blowing thing to me, is going beyond just the idea of transforming a country. How do you lead a country? How do you handle the political intrigue and all of that? But think about this. China in the 1960s, 70s, it was one of the most third world or backward countries in the entire world, right? Up until through the 80s, when Deng Xiaoping had finally, started to take charge and started to build up tons and tons of infrastructure. And in less than 30 years, this country had been one of the poorest countries in the world to become one of the leading superpowers. And I think it's great to learn from this, because there's a lot of countries out there You know, if you're even a country leader watching this video, or you're aiming to be a politician, it would be great to understand, what this is all about. And it's not just about communism, right? Because political stance aside, communism, democracy, dictatorship, capitalism, socialism, whatever your stance is, to think about how you lead a country, right? In those days, from the 1940s up until now, the U.S. was and still is the world superpower, and very capitalist. A lot of other countries in the world have more capitalist tendencies. Now, how does the big question here that I think is phenomenal, that's amazing to learn a little bit more about, is how do you compete in a capitalist world with the communist government, while also making sure that your communist government does not become capitalist, while also making sure that the government officials and the people in power and the entire population doesn't think you're trying to turn into a capitalist country? Think about that concept for a second. I know it's much further beyond where most people probably even consider, but to hear about how those types of things happen, to creating massive change. This is great for business leaders who have massive change and shifts that need to be happening. It's not about running like a communist business or anything, but to understand how to handle those conversations. I mean, this book just blows my mind. Again, this is recommended by Bill Gates, right? And overall, it talks about the transformation of how one of the poorest countries in the world came to become a superpower under the leadership of good old Deng Xiaoping. And there's so much that has to be said about this, about maintaining loyalty to country. This isn't just me or Bill Gates talking. You got winner of the Lionel Gelber Prize, finalist National Book Critics, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Economist, Financial Times, New York Times book of the year. So tons and tons of great reviews. And looking at this here, let's just read one of these reviews from the Washington Post. A masterful new history of China's reform era. It pieces together from interviews and memoirs perhaps the clearest account so far of the revolution that turned China from a totalitarian backwater led by one of the monsters of the 20th century into the power it has become today. Now, I totally get that, this is a Washington Post. Consider that as a journalist's consideration of Chinese history, right? So, anyone who might hear that, who knows China, would know that, somebody would get insulted over there. But with that said, this is a very good book that does a good job of documenting this guy, sharing his story. It's not an easy read. It's really for anybody who just has a huge interest in a topic. And I would argue that any first generation or second, maybe even third generation Chinese person in the USA should definitely pick up this book. Learn about the history, not just the political landscape and the mind-blowing things that occurred through the historic leadership in China, but also how transformation happens, how one country can be that backward water country and become one of the top players in the world. And if you're a business leader, not only are you going to learn from the leadership lessons from here and maybe be able to apply some of the ideas in this book to yours, but also the opportunity to be more culturally aware and also to be to possibly even get some ideas. I mean, this guy had major influence. You talk about transforming a company. You talk about disruption. You talk about things like that and competition. This is a compendium of some tips and advice in those areas. And although, I think this goes much further beyond where, most of us are gonna reach, or where most of us even need to know, but it's really interesting. I mean, historically, you think about the biography of a country, and you think about, or the history of a country, and you think about it in a history books type of terms, right? You get the dates, you get the figures, you get, maybe some of the leaders and the possible consequences. But imagine just reading one book that has documented actual conversations, the interviews of people who were affected by those things, people who led those things, people who influenced those major decisions. It's a whole different type of insight, whereas one side is a presented in very succinct formats, designed for lectures and all that. This is written by Ezra F. Vogel, who worked for, I think he was an intelligence person, CIA or something, Central Intelligence Agency. It says it all in the foreword, but he had he did a lot of work with China back in those days, and he does a great job of just giving you so much insight about the country, about China, about where it came from, where it's going, and so much to learn from this book, not just from a historical knowledge perspective, but from a cultural perspective, a cultural understanding of what happened, where they were, where they are today, business lessons, political lessons, personal life lessons, overcoming challenges, forgiveness, staying true to principles, and so many great lessons from this. It's recommended by Bill Gates as well. If you look up this book on his blog, I think it's Gates Notes, you'll even find this book. So check that out. Deng Xiaoping and Transformation of China. Let's go through. I mean, you got some amazing reviews here. Perhaps no one in the 20th century had a greater long-term impact on world history than Deng Xiaoping. We're talking world history here. I mean, just a moment ago, I was talking about China. I didn't get to read this, but this is world history, because what China did during those times had a huge impact on what America would do, and all these other countries as well, because, once you start to transform an entire country and mobilize it towards manufacturing, back in the 80s and all that, you got America that needs to compete. You got companies like General Electric who had to compete, and that's a massive change and things like that. So no scholar of contemporary East Asian history and culture is better qualified than Ezra Vogel to disentangle the many contradictions embodied in the life and legacy of China's boldest strategist. I mean, there you go. If you're a strategist, if you're a business strategist, a political strategist, this book is for you. Vogel has gone to enormous lengths to document his subject. His painstaking research provides plenty of fascinating details. I mean, for me, it sounds like Ezra F. Vogel dedicated his entire life to accurately understanding China. So Ezra F. Vogel. So he's a professor. I mean, really famous, successful professor. And okay, so all right, so here we go. All right, so let's see what else. Vogel knows China's elite extremely well, not least because of his years as an intelligence officer in East Asia for the Clinton administration. There, the intelligence officer. So I don't know if he was like CIA, but whatever intelligence officer means, maybe he was working in the military, he was doing intelligence, whatever that is. This book is bolstered by insider knowledge and outstanding sources such as interviews with Deng's interpreters, the definitive account of Deng in any language, masterful new history of China's reform era, pieces together from interviews and memoirs, clearest account, lively portrait of a man. Vogel provides a wealth of fascinating material from vivid accounts of Deng's political and organization skills in reviving the economy, in the mid 1970s to his up and down relationships with Vietnam and its leaders. So, regardless of what your interest is in China, global, Sino, Asian, American, Chinese relations, whatever your interest is in that, this Ezra F. Vogel is one of the people to read. If you got to read up on culture, if you got to pick up any book to learn about culture, and I'm not just talking about like cultural standards, like how you shake hands or whatever. I'm talking about like, you think about China, right? China is they're very authoritative, and whereas you can understand where they are today, where they might be from this, while in the USA, everybody tries to become different. All different types of leaders come in and out. But when you have like an authoritative country, you think about how things happen. It's well documented in here. So with that, this is definitely an extended review of this book, what you can learn, what you can gain from it. And I can understand why Bill Gates might have read this. I mean, Bill Gates, he's making deals with nation leaders of nations to get his Microsoft, pushed through and everything. So that you're talking probably at least a couple $1 billion before you even start considering how to what you can learn from this, or how you can actually apply things from here. But on the individual basis, there's a lot to be gained, not just from knowing about the history and this guy Deng Xiaoping, but also about having a deep understanding about some of the potentially cultural roots. Now, I imagine a lot has changed, right, since 1990 up until now. Anybody who's traveled to China back and forth between 80s and 2000s can easily tell you how much has changed on a physical standpoint. But to understand the deep roots of the history of this country, of China, and how it transformed, can really probably give you a leg up on the competition if you're a business owner or something, or if you're just a historian. Pick up a book that's got some of the most accurate insider interviews, as opposed to just textbook. So with that, thank you for watching this video. Hope it was very helpful to you, and I hope this video was interesting, and that more than any of that, to pick up this book, Deng Xiaoping and Transformation in China. It's not an overnight read. It might take you a little while, but it's totally worth it. It's totally interesting. Check that out. Link in the description below, and you can order it online through Amazon. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for watching.